Hi there, I'm Tom Poland, and welcome back to Tom's Grinder Lab. This is a five-part series on how to enjoy great espresso, and this is part 5 of 5. It is the advanced part, and it's all about unpacking the what, the why, the how of how I conduct and how you can conduct blind taste comparisons so you can figure out how to refine and improve your espresso. Let's have a look at our agenda today. Number one, what is blind taste comparison? Why I blind compare? My blind comparison protocols, how I blind compare in the Grinder Lab. We'll go into the Grinder Lab and have a look at that. How you can blind compare at home, and what I call blind comparison categories, where you can start with blind comparison. So what is blind comparisons? Let's kick off with that. Well, you don't actually need a blindfold for it, but essentially it's this. So you get two espressos with one difference. For example, two different beans, but everything else is the same. Or two different burst sets or grinders, but everything else is the same. Two different temperatures or two different RPMs. And when you blind compare, you have no idea which is which. You sample each one, you take notes, and after you're done, you find out which one you prefer. And the idea is to eliminate or minimize as many variables as possible. And I'm going to show you how I do that in the Grinder Lab and how you can do it at home. So, for example, I have on my bench right now two Varia VS6s, which I really like. One with stock burrs and the other with the conical burrs, and I'm going to use the same beans, and I'm going to use my two decent DE1 EXLs to grind simultaneously, then pour simultaneously in the decents, and then I'll put them on a Lazy Susan, and I'll blind taste test, and I'll take notes, and I'll figure out which one I like. And then, once I've figured all that out, I'll identify which espresso came from which grinder. So you can do this with all sorts of grinders. This is one of the shelves on what I call my grinder garage, with some of the comparisons waiting for the Philos versus the DF4 versus the WPM, ZP1, etc. So you can do this with all sorts of different things. Why do I blind compare? I guess that's the next question. And I blind compare because there is so much unconscious bias that is fighting against facts. Now, we know that espresso is very subjective, but at the end of the day, we need to express an opinion or arrive at opinion, if you like. And the best way to do that is to try and get the unconscious bias out of it. Now, if you think you don't have unconscious bias, that's because it's unconscious. Hello. But I can tell you that there is all sorts of unconscious bias at play when we sample different espressos. There's a bias towards better looking grinders, aesthetic bias. There's a bias towards the grinder that I just bought, confirmation bias. There's a bias towards expensive kit. 5K must produce a better result than 1K, surely, especially if I've just spent the 5K. There's a bias. I've seen bias away from expensive kit. People who struggle to spend as much money as some other people will have a bias towards cheaper kit. So it can work both ways. There's a bias towards bigger must be better, 83 mil burrs versus 64 mil burrs, which is frankly not true. But there's a bias there, and there's also a bias towards shape of burrs, conical versus flat. There's a bias toward new things. Some people have a bias towards old things. All of this stuff is at play unconsciously. And unless we eliminate it, or at least mitigate it, minimize it as much as possible, then it's going to affect our judgment. And if you have any doubt about this, if you think you're one of the people that's far more rational than anyone else, do yourself a favor, get this book, Predictably Irrational, and have a read of it, because in there you'll find that some of the people who are the most objective people in the world, people who make decisions in Forex trading or people who make actuarial decisions, are actually operating very often on unknown, unconscious bias. They don't know that it's there. They don't even know that they've got an unconscious bias at play. So if you want a bit of a wake-up call as to how powerful unconscious bias is, then this is a great book to do it. Now, I've developed some blind comparison protocols, actually 3 protocols or rules, as I would call them. Let me share them with you. And as I have to tell you, there's as many protocols or rules around blind testing and how you can do it as there are types of coffee beans. So there's a lot, but this is my set, not the only set, maybe not the best set, but it's one that served me well so far until I find a better one. Now, rule number 1 is probably the same across all blind comparison protocols, in that we want to be able to eliminate or minimize all variables other than the 2 items being compared. So for example, we would want the air humidity and the air temperature to be the same for item 1 versus item 2. Item 1 being the espresso that comes from one grinder, item 2 being the espresso that comes from the other grinder. We want the air humidity to be the same for both grinding and both puck prep and the pouring. We want the water temperature that the espresso is produced at to be identical. We want the espresso temperature in the cup when it's sampled to be the same across both samples, because As espresso cools, flavor notes separate and you taste different things. So if I have two espressos poured from, say, a ZP1 burr versus a Masophilus 198D burr, then at espresso pour temperature, they're going to be tasting very, very similar. Once I let them cool to room temperature, then I'll detect flavor notes. But that brings me to rule number 2, which I'll come to in just a second. So we want the espresso temperature to be the same when it's sampled. We want the pre-infusion pour profiles, the way the espresso comes out of the espresso machine, that recipe, we want it to be the same. We want the coffee beans to be the same. We want the cup temperature to be the same. So everything has to be the same. And that brings me to rule number 2, is that I want to simulate reality. In other words, I want to be drinking and comparing and reporting on the espresso from the 2 different grinders or 2 different puck preps or whatever it happens to be, as you would drink the espresso at home or in a cafe. So therefore, I don't let it cool to room temperature because it's unlikely that the majority of people are enjoying their espresso at room temperature. They're enjoying it at pour temperature. So this end, I'm not slurping the espresso in like a soup spoon type, like you see people do with cupping. I'm not actually going to be doing cupping as well, because you're not doing that at home when you're enjoying your espresso. I want to simulate reality and I want to experience the espresso as you are likely to be experiencing it at home. So for that reason also, I drink after pouring versus drinking it at room temperature, as I mentioned before. I don't do professional tasting courses because you probably haven't done one. I want my experience and my comparison in the blind comparison to be as similar to your experience of drinking espresso at home. Otherwise, it loses relevance. And on that note, if you're at home and you normally drink milk, when you do the comparisons, I'm going to show you how you can do that at home, then put milk in. If you normally have sugar, put sugar in. If you normally use a certain type of bean, don't suddenly buy a different bean. I know someone who bought some really cheap supermarket beans to test, and it's just not relevant to your experience. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is the taste is the only relevant arbiter. It's the only relevant judge. So in my testing and comparing, I don't use refractometers, and I don't send samples to laboratories, and I don't use a particle analyzer. Here's the thing, you can't taste a number. My encouragement to you would be to back your taste buds to tell the difference. And if you can't tell the difference between 2 different samples from 2 different grinders or 2 different puck prep methods or from slow feeding, if you can't tell the difference on your taste buds, then it's not significant enough for you to worry about the variable that you've been testing one against the other. Either will be fine. So you always remember, you can't taste a number. And I know this could be controversial because some people I admire greatly, such as the Scott Rayos of this world, the Lance Hedricks of this world, the James Hoffmans of this world, do use a lot of these items. And I choose not to. Full respect to them, and I'm not trying to undermine their methodology at all. I have full respect to people doing things differently. If we don't do things differently, we don't advance our experience of espresso. The diversity of blind comparison protocols is what can advance espresso. So I don't use these things. Taste to me is the final arbiter. If I can pick up a difference in a particle analyzer, if I can pick up a difference in total dissolved solids off a refractometer, that's just a number, but I may not be able to notice the difference on my taste buds. So there are my 3 rules. Eliminate or minimize all variables as far as possible. Simulate reality. In other words, experience the espresso. I experience my espresso when I do these blind comparisons the way I think you probably experience your espresso at home. And rule number 3, taste is the relevant arbiter. You won't find me using refractometers or particle analyzers, etc. So that's it. There's my 3 rules and my 3 protocols. I do use a tasting log. This is something that I'll make available to you for free. I'll put a link underneath the video. You can go to my website. You'll have to opt in, but don't worry about that. You can download it and unsubscribe if you want to. But I'll give you a link to show you, to give you, I should say, the comparison log that I use. And I'm going to show you when we go to the grinder lab right now exactly how that all works. So let's have a look in the grinder lab and I'll walk you through the procedure. I'll step out of the way. I've got a Lazy Susan. There are my cups marked under the bottom, left and right. And there's my Lazy Susan, which I've nicknamed the equalizer. I have another one called the BS detector. This is sped up a bit, but you can see I'm testing 2 different DF64V grinders with different burr sets. I've got my favorite Passato high extraction filter baskets, identical in each one. You'll see on the left and on the right. Oops, here's my log that I'm going to be using that I showed you just a moment ago. You'll see on the left and the right, there are two decent DE1 XLs, and I've chosen them for their temperature stability and accuracy, ditto with their pressure. They've all been benchmarked and tested with SCACE devices and Passato PSD device, etc. Doing the puck prep for the first one, I've taken both water filters out of the group heads because I want them to be at the same temperature. Prepare them both and then insert them both at the same time. Get the scales ready. L is on the left-hand side, R is on the right-hand side. Get the scale sorted out. That one was playing out not quite right. And then press the go buttons. The pours are both started. So everything as far as humanly possible is equalized other than the two different burr sets that I'm testing. Spin the Lazy Susan, so I don't know which is which. Sample one, make a note on the log, rinse in between, and I repeat that 3 times, making a note of which sample was which at the end of each time. So I'm just out of shot, I'm just picking up the cups and having a squiz underneath. So that's the protocol I'm using when I compare 2 different burr sets or 2 different WT methods or 2 different RPMs, etc. I want everything to be identical other than the variables that I'm comparing against each other. Now, I have those 2 DE1 XL espresso machines at home because they are extraordinarily temperature accurate, extraordinarily pressure accurate, and I've used SCACE devices to ensure that both of them are calibrated so that they're identical to each other and so on. But what do you do at home in the likelihood that you probably have the one espresso machine and having a second one would, cause a matrimonial dispute? So this is how you blind compare at home, assuming you have only one espresso machine. It's pretty much identical to the last way, except what's going to happen is you're obviously going to do one pour at a time. In this case, I'm using the left-hand espresso machine, doing the puck prep, tamping off to the side there, and doing the first pour while I'm grinding for the second sample from the other grinder with a different burr set. So the first pour is now in the cup, and the second pour is about to start. I've just tamped it. There's the second pour. Now this is all 5 times normal speed, as you can see. And here's the difference. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a temperature gun, and I'm going to take the temperature of the first pour, which is 58.4, and temperature of the second pour, which is 61.3. Now that's no good. That's almost 3 degrees difference. I need to cool the second pour down a little bit. By the way, you can just use a barbecue thermometer if you wanted to do that. I'm showing you that just so you don't have to buy something more expensive. But the heat guns, the temperature guns have certainly come down a lot in price. And this is how I do it from one sample to the next if I was using a barbecue thermometer. But let's go back to the heat gun. And I'm just confirming that, yes, the temperatures are still quite different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the second sample. I'm going to take a room temperature cup, and I'm going to pour that hot espresso into that room temperature cup. And then I'm going to test the temperatures again. Pretty straightforward. Now, of course, the first one will have cooled down a bit by now. It's gone down to 53.8 degrees. Now, the second one should be within 1 degree, 54.8. And that's close enough for me to go ahead and do all the logging and the comparing and everything else. So hopefully that protocol is clear. We're marking the cups underneath. We're doing the pours. We're making sure the temperatures are equalized so that variable is mitigated or eliminated. Spinning the Lazy Susan around, doing the samples, doing the logs. Now, when you download the log, you'll see the step-by-step instructions are on there. So that all about spinning the Lazy Susan and mixing the cups up and having a look underneath at the lead. It's all there. So it's all just, you just follow the log step by step. And the beauty about this is you've got pretty much all the equipment you need right now. All you're going to need to invest in is a Lazy Susan. Mark a couple of cups that you've already got and mark them on the bottom with a marker pen or a labeler, and get yourself either a temperature gun or a barbecue thermometer that you might already have, and you're good to go. Now, I wanted to touch on how to get started or what to get started on, because you probably don't want to buy, say, a $10,000 Titus grinder and compare it, say, to an EG1 at $5,000. That could be more divorce material, I suspect. So I've broken this up into categories whereby it would be easier for you to start with category 1, inexpensive to go to category 2, a fair bit pricey if you go to category 3. So what's easy, simple, and free that you could probably start doing right now? Well, puck prep is an obvious one. You can use the vice distribution technique with, a puck rake versus none, and see if you do 5 different pours with one, do 5 pours with the other, and see which one is more consistent. You can try using RDT. This is the Ross droplet technique, where you mist the beans a little bit with a spray before you grind them. See if you notice any difference there. It's not a bad idea to determine for yourself if you can pick up a difference on the taste buds or in the workflow, so that you can make these decisions for yourself and not rely on the word of someone else like me. So what else can you compare that might be easy, simple, and free? And you can start with these things, and it'll give you confidence in the blind comparison protocols as you get more experience with it. Your slow feed versus dumping the beads is something doesn't cost you anything to try that. Grind speed. If you already have a variable RPM grinder, try it at the lowest speed, try it at the highest speed, get them into the 2 cups, Lazy Susan, sample, log, see if you can pick up a difference in the flavor. If you can't, then it probably doesn't matter which one you use. Any 2 existing grinders, if, for example, you have an electric grinder and you have a hand grinder, you can blind compare those 2. Free infusion or pour profiles. You can change the temperature. You can get it from 96 degrees down to 90 degrees. Do one at 96, do one at 90, see if you notice the difference. Pressure profiling, and so on and so on. Inexpensive, you can try puck rake versus perhaps an autocomb or something like that. You can try pouring over frozen marbles, the Paragon nucleus type concept, where you pour the espresso over a frozen ball. Different beans, you can blind compare 2 different types of beans. You can blind compare 2 different roast steps. Lots of things you can do that are very, very inexpensive. Try, say, third wave water additives, adding it to distilled water. You can try your tap water. You can try the BWT water jugs. Do the 2, blind compare them, spin the Lazy Susan, take notes. If you don't notice a difference on the tongue, then it's probably not worth worrying about changing from one to the other. Pricier ones, you can blind compare 2 different grinders. Now, you don't have to buy a new grinder. If you join a forum, your local forum, Home Barista, or here in Australia, Coffee Snobs, which is a terrific forum. I think it's one of the best in the world. There's forums in the UK and Germany and so on. Find your local forum, because you can buy and you can sell used grinders there, used espresso machines there. Now, if you buy right, you can probably sell for the same price if the new grinder you buy is not as good for your taste buds as your existing grinder. And that way you haven't dropped any money, and you've been able to, yes, a bit more expensive, you're going to be out of pocket, but you'll be able to recoup the cost of doing that if you're buying secondhand. Espresso machines, ditto. If all else fails, there's an asterisk here, which basically says, look, if it's expensive and you don't want to part with the money, then sure, have a look at YouTube reviews, have a look at people like the wonderful James Hoffman, the ubiquitous and the prestigious Lance Hedrick, who produces amazing content. Have a look at my channel. Just go to YouTube, type in the name of the grinder or the espresso machine or whatever it happens to be, and see what other people are thinking before you put your hard-earned down. So I'm really hopeful that all of this will give you the power back to make your own decisions, because there's an enormous amount of misinformation on forums and Reddit and all sorts of places on YouTube, etc. And this gives you the power to decide for yourself. Don't worry about me. I would suggest don't worry about refractometer readings. Don't worry about particle analyzers. Don't worry about doing cupping courses. Don't worry about slurping coffee from a soup spoon. Just back yourself and use your taste buds. Use the 3 rules, the 3 protocols that I showed you, and gain some confidence in learning how to taste the differences. And sometimes there isn't a difference. And sometimes I've had $5,000 grinders which has produced coffee after blind taste testing that I could not believe was, I would say, only 50% as good as a grinder 1/3 the price. So this can really liberate you to get the gear that works for your brain and your taste buds and your work preferences. As I said, by all means, please keep viewing my videos, etc. But I really want to encourage you to do the blind comparisons, because this is going to be, instead of just giving you the fish, proverbially speaking, it's going to teach you how to fish, and that will feed you not just for a meal, but for a lifetime. Okay, that's me. I'm done. Make sure you head over to Tom's Grinder Lab, where you can download This is tomsgrinderlab.com. There you go, where you can download my free guide on troubleshooting and optimization for making great espresso. Just go to the website, wait 5 or 10 seconds, and there'll be a pop-up and you can download this, and then go to the free stuff tab and you'll be able to find the blind comparison logs that I use as well, and you'll be able to download that. And that way, as I said, you'll have more power to create more of the espresso that you actually like, and you can taste that difference. Cheers.